So many friends, so many friendly faces. This is awesome. I'm going to take a bit of a liberty today and just be a bit of a grump. I hope that's okay. I think I'm probably the oldest person on the panel, so it's a liberty I'm going to take regardless of whether it's okay or not. But I want to talk a bit about community building, and I've been involved in a bunch of communities. I've also studied a bunch of modern communities. I'm just going to slightly move out of the light. You might want to adjust the camera. And there's a sort of certain type of community that's becoming a real powerhouse in terms of moving the world forward, but there's some intricacies to how that works that I just want to sort of outline. And so as quick as possible, I'll start with a story, which was back in 1999. Some of you had just been born, I'm sure. There was the APEC summit, and Bill Clinton and all the sort of Pacific world leaders came to New Zealand, and I was a student down in Christchurch, and as all good students, I did my fair share of political protests, and so I sort of headed on down to Cathedral Square, and we marched and we chanted to Bill Clinton, and we were chanting about it was Indonesia and the occupation of East Timor and change that we wanted to see, and it was great, and there was lots of solidarity, and everyone felt awesome. And then we got to the square, and there was a big setup of microphones and PA, and the organisers sort of got up, and some people sort of spoke passionately about the problems of the world. And everyone was getting really riled up, and it was all good stuff. And then they sort of opened up the mic to people that wanted to talk, and some people came up and said some things, and this young guy got up and sort of rambled on a bit, and it was like, energy's a bit odd here. And then it was like, that was a little bit nationalistic for my liking, and it was a wee bit xenophobic, and it was like, that was actually pretty racist. And then it sort of just got worse and worse, and everyone just stood around uncomfortably wondering what to do, because it was an open mic. We'd said, hey, anyone can come and have something to say. And so it kind of deflated the whole event. Everyone was just left in this really awkward place of like, well, we didn't really support that guy, but we kind of gave him the opportunity to speak, and then we couldn't stop him, and I was just a spectator, so I sort of had no role in it. But it got me thinking about who sort of makes and enforces the rules in communities, and how does any of that work? And I've always sort of thought about communities as being like biological systems, in that at their very most fundamental, they need to be able to import nutrition, good things, and they need to export waste. They need to figure out how the undesirable behavior and toxicity that builds up inside relationships can be exported out of that community, so that it doesn't just build up and go septic. And the way this happens is by designing and holding boundaries, actually having boundaries that you can hold. And over time, there's sort of lots of different formations of communities, and I don't have much time, so I'll go pretty quickly. But if you could loosely sort of label them under three labels, and one is sort of socially structured, so you've got religion and family and ethnocentric sort of groupings and political, and the way that these structure themselves to export the waste, to make and enforce the rules, is usually there's some sort of leader. There's a patriarch, or there's a pope or a warlord or whoever it is, and they make the rules and they export the waste as they see it in terms of making the community work the way they want it to work. And then you've got these sort of economically structured communities, which are things like corporations, nation states, based on taxation and infrastructure and spending and all of those sorts of things, brands, even non-profits and cooperatives and things like that. And they manage these rules usually by either elected officials or money, whoever has the money, the shareholding, the voting rights, the directorships, the CEO title. They make the rules. They decide what behavior is okay, what's not okay, and then they take action in order to export what they see as waste inside the system or toxicity to try and keep the thing on an even keel. And the kind of community that I'm really interested in, and that I think my guess is all of you are interested in, is the kind of modern community that sort of goes under a whole bunch of different titles. And it might be inclusive, open, democratic, transparent, by and for the people, diverse, co-creating, all of those words that we kind of hold dear, and I hold dear in terms of how a human's going to go forward to actually do something useful in the world and not be dictated to and not just participate in somebody else's game. And I'd sort of loosely title these inclusive communities. And they're wonderful, and they're the things that are going to make a difference for us, but there's a big problem with inclusive communities. And that is when we build them, we often don't pay attention to how we're going to export the waste, and we end up like the protest in Christchurch with bad behavior and kind of no way of dealing with it. Oftentimes the people that set up these communities are doing it expressly as a kind of counterpoint to the way that most of our structures work in terms of being kind of dominator hierarchies or corporate hierarchies or things like that. And so we expressly write out any of that stuff when we build these communities. And I've seen a whole bunch of communities either explode or implode because the toxicity from bad behavior just builds up to the point that relationships can't handle it anymore and everyone just goes, fuck this, I'm going home. Or they just kind of dribble along and are really unsatisfactory because no one's actually able to resolve the sort of integral conflict and get to the alignment that we actually need to make these things go forward. And so I've just been really sad looking at a bunch of communities that are kind of in this space, but this is the big problem of our age because these communities are what we need. These are our answer to kind of what the world's given us so far. So without being a complete Debbie Downer, as my 11-year-old would call it, I want to sort of make a statement about what I think needs to happen, and for all of you as community builders, what you need to do to make this work, or at least have a decent shot at it. And that's to build boundaries in our communities and then hold them, and hold our shape in the face of bad behavior, in the face of the wrong people showing up, or the people showing up to do the wrong thing at the wrong time. And this leadership that we're going to bring needs to be rooted in our passion for the community and what the community is trying to create. But it won't just happen automatically. Finding a group of beautiful people to come together and just magically make it work is not the answer. We actually need to find those people committed and say, how do we want this to go? What do we want this structure to be? How do we want to make this happen? And then we have to architect it. But the rub is that there's going to be a whole bunch of people that are going to hate you for it. Because a lot of the people that are passionate about these kinds of communities are people that have a whole bunch of psychological baggage about authority issues, power issues, corporate ownership issues, all of that stuff. And so anything that they see that looks like structure and looks like somebody asserting some sort of authority will activate all of that shadow, and you'll cop, the wrath of people thinking that you're the authority and this is the old way of doing community. And so I'm out of time. But what I'm here to say is that your job in this situation is to stand your ground. It's to take it on the chin that people aren't always going to be happy about what you're doing. It's to take it on your chin that some people won't hold your vision for where the community has to go and what it needs to get there. You won't have a crown or an army or whatever the Pope wears on their head. You won't have anointed authority or a government mandate to make this happen. It has to be you. You'll have you and your vision for the community, and you'll have to stand in that. But do not bend. Because if you bend, and people will come at you and say, well, this isn't inclusive, or this isn't transparent, or this isn't all number of wonderful adjectives. Are they adjectives? It's never good at English. List of words that they would like to describe their community with. And your job is to not bend and to say, we're designing this community, we're holding boundaries, we're building something that can withstand over time, something that can get stronger and stronger and last and deal with bad behavior. I'm done. Thank you.